Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Leading from Alignment. I am here today hosting a special guest. Jim is under the weather, and so he's not with us today. If you're praying, keep him in your prayers. We have with us somebody who I hope is becoming a friend of mine. His name is Daniel Whitehead. Daniel is the CEO of Sanctuary Health Ministries, a wonderful ministry that if you didn't get a chance to listen to episode 216. He spent some time really unpacking the organization to us and how he got involved. And it was a wonderful conversation in episode 216 about what's going on in the church in terms of their struggles with anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation and just how God, just has raised Daniel and his team up to really speak to these issues, especially on the congregational side of things. So Daniel, just as a kind of a recap of 216, tell us a little bit about how Sanctuary Health got started and how you got involved in it, and then just talk a little bit about what you see happening in the lives of people who attend church in terms of their mental and emotional well-being.
Yeah. Yeah. So Sanctuary Mental Health was founded here in Vancouver, Canada, where I'm speaking from. And it's approximately 12 years old as a nonprofit. We're just launching into the US in the early part of 2024. But yeah, I've had the privilege of leading it for 7.5 years. And in that time, we've been really taking Sanctuary's message of integrating theology, psychology, and person's story, and how we integrate those give us, as the people of Christ, a new way to speak about this subject and a new way of being a supportive environment for people who are recovering in various stages of their mental health journeys. So Sanctuary created the Sanctuary course, which is an 8-session free course that churches anywhere can use, and it's being used all over the world in multiple languages. And yeah, so I've been leading Sanctuary through this journey of growth, and it's growing quickly and rapidly. And it's our joy to kind of serve the church in this way. And I think what I see in the church is I don't really see much different when I think about the mental health needs. The church is not immune to this. The church has as much need as wider society does. The church is not immune to anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, suicide, you name it. The church has these experiences in it. So I think it's really important that we, as the people of Christ, the body of Christ, learn how to hold this space for people, because many people are struggling.
And when I began to share my own mental health journey in public over 20 years ago, Daniel, I was shocked at the response. How many people would say, I'm struggling with anxiety, I'm struggling with depression, I've thought about taking my life. And I was stunned. I'm not stunned anymore. It doesn't shock me anymore when we're in front of a group of people at a church and I tell my story of coming through suicidal depression many years ago, and then the response is overwhelming to it. And I've heard people say things like, thank you for giving me permission to struggle, that it's okay to not be all together. And I often think about things that were said to me when I was in the middle of the long dark tunnel of major depression that were true but weren't really helpful. Like Romans 8:28, remember God, works all things together for the good of those who love him. And that's true, but when you're in the long dark tunnel, not really helpful. Or things like, you just need to pray more, or you need to cast the devil out of yourself, or something that, again, we all need to pray more. And I don't think we all need to cast the devil out of ourselves. Let me just make that clear. But giving language, giving good theological and psychological and caring language to our congregations when it comes to this, it just It's fascinating to me. It's compelling to me. It's something that I've noticed for 2 decades that was a huge need. And, there's just too many churches and too many people for me to be able to tell my story to everybody. And we're so
Mm.
grateful that God has called your organization to come in and really fill that gap, Daniel. So excited
Mm.
about getting to meet you. And I have a bunch of questions for you today. So you ready to get right at it?
Ready.
Okay. So here's the first one. And I'm going to ask this from your perspective. What do you think is contributing to the challenges we're facing with anxiety and depression and suicidal
Yeah.
ideation? What's fueling that, Daniel?
Yeah. Well, the subject, the challenge of the subject is it isn't straightforward. So when we think about
Mm,
a person is biological, psychological, social, and spiritual, and a person is always those four things. There's never moments where you're only one of those things, or if you're a human being alive, you are always those four things, and those four things have something to bear on our well-being. Very often people have an over-realized vision of a person as being purely spiritual. That's not
yeah.
true or helpful. You are spiritual, and you're physical, and you're emotional, and you're defined by your relationships. You could have someone who's physically the healthiest person on the planet, an Olympic athlete,
Mhm.
but if they have no friends, if they are isolated and they never talk to anyone, they will not be well. um,
Yeah.
you could have someone who has the best prayer life in the world, but if you don't give them food after a month, I mean, if they have water, if they don't have water, it's going to be sooner. But after a month, they're going to die. So, we have to accept that God has made us to be these integrated persons. And there
Mm,
are various aspects of society. I mean, I'm just speculating, but there are various aspects of society, recent aspects of society, that I think are making it really hard for us to be seen in community. Um, so, I mean, if I were to pick on social media, I would go, social media is literally redefining what we understand a friend to be. When you say, "Oh, how many friends have you
mm,
got on Facebook?" I mean, that's
yeah.
not, they're not your friends. It's completely changing the vision of friendship. The vision of friendship, I think, as Christians, we should hold up is the vision of Christ, who calls us friends. You know,
Yeah.
we are friends of Christ, and that's not because of anything we've done. So, and I think if you go back historically, I have a friend who did a PhD on friendship, on spiritual friendship, and she says if you analyze how friendship operated in an agrarian society, so pre-industrial revolution,
Yeah.
basically you were friends with the people who would keep you alive. Like if you have grain and I have wool, you need wool to stay warm and I need grain to stay fed, and we are going to stay friends because you need what I've got, and we help each other to survive, so
Yeah.
we both survive. We now live in a society where the autonomous individual making it on their own is king, and if I don't like what you're saying, I'm going to unfriend you, I'm not going to talk to you.
Yeah.
We're basically reshaping the biblical vision of friendship, and it's making us more isolated, it's making us more alone, and I don't think that's helping our mental health and well-being.
Yeah. This idea that we are integrated beings,
Mm.
that there's actually four pieces to that integration. There's a spiritual piece, there's a physical piece, there's a mental and emotional piece, and then there's this relational or social piece. And
Mm.
I think what we do is we might fill one of those. I look at them as tanks, so to speak. Like we fill
Mm.
one of those tanks pretty well, and the other three are left neglected, and we wonder why we find ourselves depressed or anxious or thinking, "Hey, this world might be better without me in it," type of
Yeah.
thoughts. And as Christians, especially, I think that we have this tendency to believe that the spiritual part of our life will, and I believe it does influence the other parts of our life, but
Mm.
that if we take care of our spirit, that all these other things don't matter. And my response to that has been, well, okay, so if you want to lose weight or you want to get fit, you can pray and read God's word for 2 hours every day. But if you don't exercise and stay away from
Yep.
the refrigerator, you're not going to lose weight. You're not going to get fit. It's a
Yep.
different set of behaviors
Hmm.
that fill that particular tank. I mean, I don't know if that's a good way to think about it, but that's kind of how I've try
No,
to architect that for
I think
people.
it's true. I think it's true. I think people who have an over-realized spirituality, which I'm not anti-spirituality.
Right.
I believe in spirituality, and I believe spirituality has the power to shape and impact the other aspects of ourselves. But I
Yes.
believe the other aspects of ourselves have the power to shape our spirituality. So,
Mm.
if you're my old New Testament professor used to playfully say, you can't get air quotes on a podcast, but he used to say, many a demon has been cast out, or many a demon has been cast out by a good night's sleep and a proper meal. So,
Yeah.
there are practical,
Or a good friend, right?
or a good friend, or a good community, or a combination of these things. So there are very practical needs we have as people, and we can pretend that's not true, but we all know that's true. We all know
Yeah.
Jesus, even when he was resurrected, he ate. So
Yes.
there's something about physicality that's kind of important to God, and we can pretend it's not, but it is. Like the Bible says it is. So, yeah, yeah, as you say, you can, according to that way of thinking, you can literally do anything in the world just by reading the Bible and praying more. And of course, that's not true. You can't
Right.
train to be an astronaut by reading your Bible. You need to go through the
Yes.
training, and it's the same with anything. So, yeah, and that's not an unfaithful thing to say. That's just the way God's made it. This wonderful
Right.
creation.
Yeah, I'm in the book of Genesis right now, Daniel, and Genesis chapter 2, I think it's verse 18 says, uh, uh, then the Lord said, it is not good for man to be alone.
Hmm.
Uh, Let us, and so Adam lived in a perfect environment. He had the perfect job, no stress, no health problems physically, perfect relationship with God, unhindered, unfettered. And
Yeah.
yet God said, this guy needs another human
Yeah.
to do life with. And so
Yeah.
I think if we just read the Bible and we're honest, uh, and and we're thoughtful, we can see these four elements, these four pieces of our being reflected in Scripture. And
Yeah.
there's we follow the pattern of Jesus and the way he
Yeah.
did things, and I think we'd be a lot healthier. Um, and that just begs the next question that I have. I wonder, for our pastors who are listening and watching today that are serving churches, what would be maybe a few good first steps that churches could use to address this epidemic of mental and emotional lack of health in these areas? I think the largest during the pandemic, I believe the CDC said, I think it was in December of 2020, I think it was 42% of Americans reporting struggling
Yeah.
with depression. I mean, it's never
Yeah.
been like that.
Yeah,
Um,
during the pandemic, it was 42%. After the pandemic, the latest numbers were 33%, I think.
which is
So
still horrible, right?
yeah, and pre-pandemic, it was like 11%. So it's
Right.
post-pandemic, it's three times worse than it was before. Yeah,
Yes.
statistically.
So what does the church do? Where do they start? Give us some
Hmm.
practical steps.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. I mean, obviously, Sanctuary makes resources to help churches have conversations and to engage the subject. So you can go on sanctuarymentalhealth.org, look at our resources, including an album we've made. If you want to just listen to music that engages the subject, you can listen to Sanctuary songs. But aside from that, I think we probably, as leaders, need to accept what we don't know, and
Mm,
and and it probably starts by saying, do you know what? I feel overwhelmed by this and I need help. Um, and there are people probably in your congregations that can help you. There will be mental health professionals in your congregations who may have been sitting there quietly doing their vocation of caring for people who have lots of wisdom to offer. So I always think trying to find ways to elevate the conversation, to mobilize the people in your congregations who have something to say. If you as a leader can find the bravery and strength to speak openly about your own challenges, these are things that are
mm.
going to help bring this subject to the fore in the congregation. Um, but as we said in the last episode, just be aware that there are people out there who will try and weaponize your vulnerability, but that
Yes,
doesn't mean you shouldn't be vulnerable. It just means there's a cost, to
that's right.
carry your cross.
But I wonder if the cost of not being vulnerable is more.
Yeah, I
and the cost of being vulnerable.
I think it is. I mean, I think it is. It's being a human being, as much as we want to believe the media representations of what a good life should look like. Last time I checked, the best life that was ever lived ended up on a cross, and I don't think that's a good thing, but it's true. So the good life
Right.
that we're being encouraged to follow is the life of Christ, which included people saying terrible things about him. Oh, he's a drunkard. He doesn't know what he's, talking about. People accusing him of things that, oh, he's in league with Satan. These are things that Jesus had to endure in order to pursue God's kingdom. And it's the same for us. There is
Yeah.
immense struggle in this life if we live it authentically, but
Yeah.
it can still be good.
Yeah. And I feel this way, that part of our part at Converge Coaching has been to normalize this conversation around anxiety, around depression, to
Mm,
demystify, to destigmatize. Um, I know you believe this. I believe this, that the church should be leading the charge
mm,
here in the area of mental and emotional, social, physical well-being, because we live in a culture that's unhealthy. Many, I think I've told you this, that many times when I've spoken and shared my story, so many people respond. It's shocking. The
yeah,
sheer amount of people who say, I'm dealing with this.
yeah.
I was at a church earlier this year, and there was a lineup of people that wanted to talk to me afterwards, and every one of them was in tears in one way, shape, or another,
Mm,
either saying, thank you for giving me permission, thank you for giving me language, thank you for making
yeah,
me know that it's okay not to be okay. It's that I can be a Christian, I can be a good Christian, and I can
yeah,
struggle.
yeah.
And those two things aren't antithetical to each other, and so
Mm,
I think this point about speaking openly about it from the platform
mm,
gives it starts down that pathway. And yeah, is it risky? Of course it is. But I would say this, that if you don't talk about it, that's a risk too. And I
yeah.
think you're taking a bigger risk by not talking about it. So I love those steps. I think they're really practical. Um, how does what Sanctuary Mental Health Ministries, how does this fit into the picture, Daniel? Now you told us a little bit about the course, and can you tell us though, can you give us more? Like how does what you do, how can a
Mm,
pastor, how can leaders really start to incorporate um, the material that you guys have put together? And by the way, I haven't completed the course, but I've looked at several of the videos, and they are so well done, so
mm,
amazing. But how does a church really grab onto this and
yeah,
make a run with it, so to speak?
yeah. Well, the course has been designed to be used in a range of different ways, but the course essentially, at its core, what the course is trying to do is to help facilitate a conversation that the church may feel like it doesn't know how to have. Like it's
Mhm.
overwhelming, it's scary. So, how do we build a shared framework and a shared language, a platform upon which a church can really think about how do we support people? And that will look slightly different for every congregation, every
Okay.
context. But essentially, there is no doctrine of mental health that exists. So, Sanctuary, we asked this question years ago. We said, well, someone has to build that initial framework, like to even
Mm.
know how to have a conversation, to even know how what we think about this. So the course does that, and it's designed for small groups. It can just fit
Okay.
in as a small group curriculum. Bible study could use it. We use scripture in the course to help hold it together. So it would fit into that environment. I know churches that have run it. They have like a mission to get 25% of the church through the course. Other churches use it like they'd use an alpha course. It's like a curriculum that they now use cyclically, like a couple of times a year. Other churches put all their small groups through it. It's flexible enough to be used in those environments. But really, what it's trying to do is facilitate a really safe a sanctuary conversation, a safe conversation about mental health, so that that small group has a shared experience and they come out the other end with greater competency and awareness to know how to offer support to someone and how not to offer support to someone, and
Yeah.
how to see the role of spiritual community as being a very important part of a person's recovery, as important as the role of doctors or therapists or medication, seeing spiritual community as a unique facet of a person's recovery. Yeah.
So Daniel, in the small group setting, I know that we have these 20, I think the videos are about 20 minutes or so
Yeah.
in length. Are there other supporting materials that are available? So like a small group facilitator kind
Yeah.
of knows how to take it from there and what to talk about, and talk a little bit about those resources.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you were to go on our website, sanctuarymentalhealth.org, you'd register for an account, you'd get in, and there's a whole load of different resources to help people facilitate the course well. There's a discussion guide that people use and it's accessed digitally. There's the films. There's a leader guide to help leaders think about how to facilitate the group. But as I always say, if you can facilitate a small group, like if you can facilitate an alpha course, you can facilitate a sanctuary course. What it needs is
So you don't
group
so you don't need to be a therapist,
you don't need to be a mental health
counselor.
professional. No, you
Okay.
just need to be able to facilitate a small group. That's
Mm,
it. So there's resources that can help you do that. There's even marketing materials. Everything is on our website to help churches succeed.
mm. What would you say, and I'm going to go off script, but not really here. What would you say to a pastor who is listening or watching today, and they said, "I'm not sure I want to open this can of worms
Mm,
in my congregation. I'm afraid
yeah,
of
yeah,
what might come." I'm sure you've run into that in your 7 years plus that you've been doing this. How would you talk to
yeah.
that?
Well, I first of all, I'd have empathy
Mm,
for the fear that's driving that decision to hold back. Like I understand it is overwhelming and scary, but when
yeah,
you think about the conversely, what will happen if we don't talk about it in the church is it becomes a secular subject. It becomes a
yeah,
purely biomedical subject. And I think God cares about mental health. And I also know that tragically, there are times when churches reach out to Sanctuary for help when something catastrophic has happened. And it's then that we say, well, we didn't know. And I again, I only have compassion for those churches, but it
right.
just breaks my heart that it has to take someone to die by suicide before a church says, "Oh, we need to talk about mental health." That to
Yep,
assume You cannot assume that there are not, or you should not assume that there are people in your congregation that are really facing these challenges because they
yep.
are, and you
I
can,
would go
this
ahead, Daniel.
I feel bad. I kind of feel bad like confronting people with that, but I also don't, because you
Yeah,
know I, we lost a young man to suicide in our church recently, and his his dad is a pastor, the wonderful family, and they knew that their son was struggling and they put things in place and it still happened. So if we're not putting in things in place, these things will happen and
yeah.
we need to
I,
talk about
I
it.
I'm not a betting man, but if I was a betting man, I believe in every congregation there are people who are wrestling with anxiety,
Yeah.
wrestling with some level of depression, some of it major, and who have thought about the world being better off without them. You can bank on it, Pastor,
I
that every
agree.
Sunday there are probably multiple people in your congregation who are wrestling with this. And
Yeah.
um and so I love that thought of, hey, if I think we said this in the last podcast, it is risky, to put yourself out there to start talking, because it is going to, I think when you start talking about this, and if you're talking intelligently, can I just say that? Intelligently and compassionately about it and accurately about it,
Mm.
um, that you will see people coming to you saying, I need help. I need. So can we talk about that for a minute, Daniel? Like, so let's
Mm.
say a pastor or a church decides, hey, we really want to start this conversation. We want to access the resources from Sanctuary. And And how do we gear up?
Yeah.
And what do we do when somebody comes to us and says, I'm suffering with one of these three evil forces, or all of them? Sometimes it's all of them at the same time. Because I do think that some pastors are going to feel overwhelmed by that, or they're going to feel not prepared for it. Can you help us
Mm.
process that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there are, the challenge is not every individual is the same. So,
Yeah.
for some people, their experiences of anxiety um, is something that they can manage, and then maybe they've learned to manage.
Mhm.
So it doesn't mean that if someone's experiencing anxiety, we need to purge the anxiety, or we need to, it may be that someone is like, do you know what, this is just something I manage and I live with, and they've actually learned many rhythms and wisdom on how to do that. And that can be the same for any lived experience of a mental health challenge or a mental illness. But for other people who are in distress,
Mm.
then I think we need to ask the question. And again, these could seem like scary questions. They're not to me, but have you spoken to your doctor? Um, can I support you in doing that? Churches could have referrals lists of
Yes.
therapists, Christian therapists, so whatever you feel comfortable with, but you could have a list of people. Churches could set aside budget each year for people who need access to professional help. And I
Yes.
think the key thing around these practical, holistic things we can do, I mean, there'll be care ministry in churches that we can, often mental illnesses, they're not casserole illnesses, right? No one's going to bring you a casserole if you experience depression. This is a very normal thing we hear from people because it's unseen. If you break a leg, I can see it, I'm going to help you. But if you've got depression, well, I'm not going to give you a casserole. But I think we can start to change that. I mean, it doesn't have to be casserole, by the way. I got nothing against the casserole, but it might be something else. But so I think we need to start changing that culture and thinking about people's holistic needs, and not being scared as the church to see the vital role we play as a part of a bigger picture of well-being that people actually need, and being a
Yeah.
conduit of that.
And I would just offer this, and Daniel, if I'm off, you just correct me on this. I think that pastors need to know their lane. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
there are some of these scenarios that get presented to you, you'll be able to help. And then there are some scenarios, you use the word distress, where
yeah,
the level of these items, the level of anxiety, the level of depression, the level of suicidal ideation will call for
yeah,
some expertise. It will call
yeah.
for, and just understanding that you don't have to fix all these problems.
No,
I think what we're really lobbying for here today is to resource,
yeah.
is to be a resource. And I was just before we were recording today, I was on a call with a client of mine who is dealing with. He did a talk on pornography, and and we're not here to talk about that today. But he said, "You, John, I can't believe people coming out of the woodwork,
Mm,
talking to me about their struggle with that now, and some are particularly difficult." And he's been carrying that. He can't sleep. He
no,
feels sick to his stomach. And I told him, well, these severe cases, you're operating out of your lane. You don't have to sit there and solve those. Move, get these.
yeah,
And we got him some direction on that. So I think sometimes pastors in the back of their mind think, I've got enough problems that
yep,
I'm dealing with. Do I really want to open this up? And I would conjecture this, that some of the problems you already have, people problems, are directly related to what we're talking about today. Not all of them.
yeah, yeah. A lot,
And
a lot, a lot are.
yeah, and you don't have to be the fix it guy. Um,
Yeah.
you just need to know where to point people for help. And so I wanted to just lower the anxiety for our listeners and watchers
Mm,
today. That, look, having this conversation, will it open up? Yeah, it will open up conversations that are uh, sometimes difficult, sometimes weighty, but I don't want our people, Daniel, and this, hopefully this sounds okay. I don't want them going to get help from somebody who won't tell them the truth,
mm,
who won't
yeah.
help them have a holistic approach to
Yeah.
well-being. And I wonder what you think about that.
No, I think that's true. I think by and large, the majority of access to, if you take healthcare, the biological component of people's recovery is done in isolation, and it's siloed and it's broken. But in that
Mm,
sense, I've got nothing against doctors or medicine. I'm
me either.
very grateful for it. We need it. But doctors are not God. I'm sorry, doctors, if you think you are, you're not. You know, a person is not just biological. A person is biological, social, spiritual, and psychological. So we have these aspects of ourselves that all need attaining to, and a doctor in isolation cannot make a person fundamentally well. A doctor needs Christ is part of the deal. The Christian community is part of the deal,
Yeah.
and in that sense, friendships and purpose are part of the deal. So yeah, I think the church is perfectly placed to be that prophetic voice in our culture that pushes back against an overly biomedicalized vision of a person and says, no, a person is biological, but they're also psychological, social, and spiritual. So I think that's what the church should be doing. And in that sense, understanding that the role of spiritual friendship is vital in recovery, but it's not the only aspect. Some
That's
people
right.
need to see doctors, some people need medication.
Yep.
Um, that's just the way
And
it is.
and I think the chances of health and recovery are so much better when we take the holistic approach.
Yeah.
One more thought, and then we're going to wrap it up. I could talk to you forever about this subject because it's just so near and dear to my heart. Um, there has been a bias in the church for many years about antidepressant medication,
Mm,
any medication to deal with any of these problems. And my take on that has simply been this: that medication in and of itself is not going to bring you all the way home. It, it's
mm,
it's not a silver bullet. Like if I just take the med, I don't have to work on these other areas of my world in order to get well.
yeah.
And it's my contention that depression, especially, is a whole person problem.
Mm,
It's not just dealt with at the spiritual level. It's dealt with at the four levels that you've expressed several times in the last two
mm,
podcasts. And so when if you need to take medicine to get stabilized, I did. I was
yeah.
so depressed, I couldn't put a rational thought together.
Mm,
So I was listening to a counselor. I just wasn't making any sense. Like I
yeah.
can't. And the
Yeah.
meds helped stabilize me so that I could
Yeah.
work on the roots of my depression. The meds weren't going to bring me all the way back, but they gave me enough stability to be able to ingest what the counselor was telling me. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've heard it said from people that, it's not that people are worried that medication is going to change you. It's going to make me someone I'm not. When actually, what I hear from most people is it allowed me to be me. I didn't,
Mhm.
it allowed me to be more fully me in a way I've never been before. And there is this great fear for whatever reason about medication for psychological reasons that there is this stigma that exists that doesn't exist for other medications. And
Right.
I mean, I've got all kinds of reasons as to why I think that is, but if you just look at it in that sense, it's like any other medication a person will need
That's
to
right.
get well. What
Yep.
it's okay.
In- Insulin, antibiotic,
Yeah,
you name it, right? Which we wouldn't bat an eye at.
yeah,
Yeah, there's really no difference. Well, Daniel, I'll tell you what, it has just been such a treat to have you on our podcast the last 2 weeks. Can you tell us one more time how we can reach out to your organization?
yes. So you can find us at sanctuarymentalhealth.org, or you can find us on Instagram, X, or Facebook. And you can even listen to Sanctuary Songs, which is an album on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you listen to music. You can listen to that as well. And that involves some amazing musicians like Matt Maher, All Sons and Daughters, Andrew Peterson. So
Hmm.
check it out.
Awesome. Well, thank you for carving time out of your busy schedule to be with us. And to you that are watching and listening today, can we just reaffirm how much we care about you? We want you as leaders to be healthy, body, mind, spirit, and in your relationships. We want your congregations to be centers of hope and healing. I believe God has given us the help, the answers, the structure to be an incredible blessing in the lives of people who are suffering. And we're here to help you. We're here to direct you in the right to the right resource. So if you want to reach out to us also at convergecoach.com, you can click on the contact us info link, and you'll get a free half hour with one of our coaches. And if we can't help you, we know a lot of people who probably can, and we'll direct you to them as well. That's a free half hour, no obligation from you. We want you to know that we bring people like Daniel to this podcast because we want you to be well in your inner man. We want you to be well in your relationships. We want you to be the best possible version of yourself so that God can use you for a long time. We want you to be in the saddle for a long time, and we're here for you. So we're rooting for you, we're cheering for you, and we're praying for you as you continue to lead from alignment.